been a hot minute. I believe the last video I released was a reading vlog in either June or July, and then I went dead silent because I had a family reunion that gave me a major crash, and then I have just been busy with health and life stuff since then. But it's January 2nd, and it's finally time for me to sum up all of my 2022 reading. And there was a lot of it. So we're gonna go over some stats really quick because I think numbers are fun, and also I'm recording this on my phone, so I don't know if I'll be able to put any of the fun charts that Storygraph gave me up on the screen. I'll try, but we'll fucking see. So the big question is, how many books did I manage to read this year? And the answer is 165. No, I was not expecting to read that many books this year. I was shocked. I made it to 164, and I had about half of a pretty chunky book still to read on the 31st, and I was like, I'm too close. I've got to make it. And I pushed through, and I made it about an hour before midnight. I was planning to read 100 books this year. That was my reading goal on Storygraph. I was like, that feels like a good, solid number. I really want to read more this year. I've really missed reading, all of that. You know, it was like a kind of, I enjoy setting kind of challenges for myself, and I enjoy on Storygraph, like watching the little green bar make progress and the number count up. So yeah, and then I hit 75 books in, I believe it was June. And I went, oh, okay, well, I'm definitely gonna make it to 100. Let's just, as a joke, set this number as high as I can without Storygraph telling me I'm books behind. And the number that I could set it without Storygraph telling me that I was books behind was 165. And I said, well, just as a joke, let's see if I can do it. And I did. And I always feel a little bit self-conscious sharing the number because I don't want people who read less to like feel ashamed that they've read less. Whatever you read is great. If you read one book in 2022, I'm happy for you. Read as much or as little as you want to or can, quite honestly. Like, not everyone is me. Many people have other priorities. And even if reading like is something you really want to prioritize, you know, you can only do so much in the time that we have. And boy, oh boy, do I have a huge advantage by not being employed. But yeah, I am really happy with that. I've set, well, we'll get into that. I'm gonna have a little like goals for 2023 section at the very end of this video, and we'll discuss my goals for the coming year. We're gonna get a little bit into some of the nitty-gritty stats that Storygraph gave me. If I'm looking down, I'm looking at my computer and the charts. I've also made notes. We're gonna cover my best and worst books of the year as well. My favorite stat that it gave me, besides a few of the other ones, is that I read 7 nonfiction books and 158 fiction books. And when I saw the number 7 nonfiction, I was shocked because I didn't think I'd read that many, but I did actually read a number of memoirs this year, which, you know, bumps that number up. My second favorite stat is how many fantasy books I read, which is 95. I read almost 100 books in the genre of fantasy this year. You could say I'm a big fan. My second most read genre was LGBTQIA+, which like I don't really consider a genre, but Storygraph does, and you know, fair enough. Then young adult, then romance, then historical, then mystery. I read 28 mystery books, and finally science fiction, which I really wanted to read more of this year. I only read 16 of, which is still way more science fiction than I've ever read in the past, but like way less science fiction than I think. I wanted my science fiction and fantasy numbers to be way closer to each other, and there's obviously like a nearly 80 book gap there. So we'll see how that goes in 2023. And of course, honorable mention to horror, which I wanted to read way more of this year, and I ended up reading 12 horror books, and quite honestly, that is a huge number for me compared to any previous year. I never really liked horror before. I could never really find kind of the niche of horror that I was interested in, and I finally started to settle into that, and I'm actually really happy about that. It was one of my kind of like mid-year, I want to pivot into this genre and I want to explore it goals, and I did. And I have figured out a lot more of what I like and dislike in horror, and I have a bunch of horror on my TBR that I'll definitely be getting into this year and in the years to follow. I think that mostly covers all of my stats. We're gonna get into it when I go into my worst and best books, but I definitely have a huge... So now, we're gonna get into my worst and best books of 2022. The worst books are in no particular order. I did put the one that I hated the most at the end. The lowest rated book of the year was The Glass Magician by Charlie Ann Holmberg, which is the sequel to The Paper Magician by the same author. I rated The Glass Magician 2 stars and The Paper Magician 3. I read them at the very beginning of the year. They're very short. I think they're just over novella length, and I found them far too fast-paced and also somehow boring. And just like too short and condensed, I think. I didn't enjoy them, and there was a teacher-student relationship that like kind of was fully signaled as like this is gonna happen in the second book, and I was just like, nope, I'm done. I don't want any more of this. They'd been on my TBR for ages, and I'm glad I read them and decided I wouldn't be finishing the series. Next is Under One Roof by Ali Hazelwood, and I am so sorry to the Ali Hazelwood stans. I read Love Hypothesis in 2021 and I liked it, so I was pretty excited for the 3 novellas coming out this year, but they came out on audiobook first, and that's where I made my first big mistake, which is I listened to the first one, Under One Roof, on audiobook. And I am not a guy who enjoys listening to sex scenes on audio. And that, like, it was so deeply uncomfortable for me that it kind of ruined the whole previous experience of the book. But I also just really didn't vibe with most of what was happening in the book before that. And then I got hit with, like, just a deeply uncomfortable sensation of, like, someone else is reading this to me, so, like, I can't skim like I normally would. And I didn't enjoy it. I don't think I'll be picking up Ali Hazelwood again because I've heard some criticisms that like a lot of her books seem to be kind of just the same thing written in slightly different ways. I've heard an okay thing about like her new novel, and I can't even remember what it's called at the moment. Is it Love on the Brain? I think it's Love on the Brain. And like I might pick something up by her one day again, but I really don't foresee it. I think in general her books aren't for me, and that they're just not interesting enough. And I don't mean that in like a derogatory way. I mean that in a like, I want a lot more out of my romance than just romance. And that's not what Ali Hazelwood is writing. So I don't think those books are for me. Next we have possibly the like most, I don't know, this is the third most. We've ranked these. This is the third most disappointing read of the year for me, as far as like what I wanted from it and what I got, and that is Book of Night by Holly Black. I'm like genuinely still sad that I didn't like this book, and when I finished it, I think I rated it 4 stars because I was really not sure if the reason this book had felt like pulling teeth to finish was because I was in a really bad CFS flare and it was hard for me to read. And looking back on it and having heard other people talk about it, that was not an experience unique to me, and I don't think it was only the CFS flare that made it so excruciating to read. I am like really confused by this book because I read it and I was like, stuff is happening, but I feel like nothing is happening. Like that's what this book felt like to me. I read it and I felt like nothing was happening, but things were happening. I could tell things were happening, but it was so deeply boring to me. And then the way she chose to end it, I really deeply disliked that ending. I felt like it undercut a lot of the emotional arc of the book and the emotional impact of some of the stuff we see in the character relationships along the way. That was just kind of the final, like, come on moment for me. I read the Folk of the Air trilogy by her also this year, and I loved it. So I was really looking forward to reading her adult debut, and you know, it is what it is. I will probably pick up anything that Holly Black does in the future and read it because, you know, one flop is not the end of the world. But yeah, it just really didn't hit for me. And next we have, and I'm so sorry for this one because this was Sapphic TikTok's darling in 2021. And I really thought I was gonna like it because I love big, chunky, epic fantasy and I love lesbians. And that's Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. My main criticism of it is that it was too long. I think you could have cut 200 pages from that book and it would have been better. It would have been better. And the real thing that sticks for me is that I've read every single published Stormlight Archives book and I've never felt like those books are too long. Brandon Sanderson has a real gift for making you feel like every single one of those 1,000 pages is earned. Samantha Shannon did not make me feel like every single one of those, 800 pages was earned. And like I'm still mad about it. Yeah, 848 pages. According to Storygraph. I still rated it pretty well. I rated it 3.75 because the one thing that Samantha Shannon did really well that I really enjoyed was that, and no author has managed to nail this for me, I never wanted to stop where I was and read ahead to another POV. Every POV switch completely nailed it for me as far as the timing, and that was so impressive to me that it bumped my rating way up. I think this would have been a 3-star or lower if she hadn't nailed that. But that was really impressive to me. And despite how long the book was, it didn't really start feeling like a chore to read until about halfway through, which is still bad. That's 400 pages that felt really hard to read. But, you know, on the whole, I don't think I'll read the sequel because this book didn't really hook me, but it's not like I've written Samantha Shannon off as an author. Man, it was a rough book. It did not need to be that long. And last, but definitely not least, my least favorite book of the whole year that I completed. The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I am so sorry to the Taylor Jenkins Reid girlies. I'm so sorry. I wanted to like this book. I wanted to like this book so much. But the last third of this book looked me in the eyes and said, fuck you specifically. She made so many choices about character endings that I didn't like, that felt unnecessary, that felt kind of, I don't want to say like amateurish, but like I think that is the word I'm looking for. It felt like she didn't know what to do with the characters and she didn't know how to end this narrative, and so she made choices that just deeply upset me and I deeply disagreed with. And then finally, Taylor Jenkins Reid, I am holding you personally responsible for being yet another writer who fumbled the ball with disability this year. And there were a lot of them because nobody is getting it right. But the more I have thought on it and the more I've kind of dwelled with the ending of Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, the more I have like really come to be angry about the choice that she made with Evelyn. And I truly just have no patience and no room left to be okay with just blatant ableism anymore. Like, I'm just not okay with it. So that's that. And I don't think I'll ever pick up a Taylor Jenkins Reid again. The problem is the concept of her books, which are all like, these books are like, what if you could hear all the celebrity hot goss and the celebrity was fake, so there's no need to feel guilty about it, which is the perfect pitch for me. I love that as a concept. I'm obsessed with it. I loved the first 2/3 of Evelyn Hugo. It was exactly what I wanted. But I no longer trust Taylor Jenkins Reid to handle the ending. And if a book doesn't end well, if a book ends in a way that makes me angry, why am I reading it? You know? And not a book that makes me angry in a good way. Like, there are some endings where I've been like, oh my god, like, you know, I hate this author playfully. But this made me genuinely angry. So, never forgive, never forget, never picking up another Taylor Jenkins Reid. I'm so sorry to the girlies. So the thing about me and reading, right, is, and we've covered this, I rate a lot of books 5 stars because basically to me, 5 stars is that was incredibly enjoyable. I feel great at the ending. I enjoyed it. I'm going to recommend it to my friends, and I have a couple of nitpicks maybe, but no major flaws. So this specifically is really helpful if you want to know my absolute favorite books of the year and the ones that I'm like, please read this. More people need to read these books. Here's the list. Here's the short list, the hand-picked list. We're going to start with Angel of the Crows by Catherine Addison. I read this book at the very beginning of 2022, and I haven't stopped thinking about it, quite frankly. It rates as possibly my #1 Sherlock Holmes pastiche fiction of all time. I can safely say that. It is my #1 Sherlock Holmes pastiche fiction of all time. The things that she does with the world building and the prose and the like twists on familiar Holmes cases, it enchanted me. I loved it. I think about this version of Holmes all of the time because they drew me in so much. I am on my knees, holding my hand to the sky. Catherine Addison, if you ever write more Holmes and Watson like this, I will buy 1 million copies if I can afford them. Please, 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 please. Also, it completely cemented my love of Catherine Addison as an author. In both of her, she writes under another name as well. I also read The Goblin Emperor this year, and I also read the books of her other series that I could get my hands on, and she writes good stuff. That's what I have to say about her. And next we have Just Like Home by Sarah Gailey. So as I mentioned earlier in this video, I made a big foray into horror this year, and there were some hits and there were some misses. This book hit it out of the park. Again, this is a book that I am still thinking about. I read it 4 or more months ago. I don't normally think about books for a very long time after I've read them. So, a lot of these are books that I'm still thinking about, books that I'm still recommending to people, books that just truly hit it out of the park for me, and this is one of them. It is a deeply, deeply fucked up story about the ways that the places and the people we grow up in and around completely shape us and kind of like haunt us forever. It's about returning home to a place that wasn't a good place for you, that left deep marks on yourself and your soul. And look, the thing that I said about this book at the time, I was reading it and I told the friend who had recommended it to me without having read it themselves, this book is scary to me, but not in the way, like, I wasn't like, oh, there's monsters under my bed. The book itself felt like a threat. The book itself, the narrative itself, felt like it was out to get me. And I don't have a better way to describe it than that. And it wasn't necessarily a bad thing. It was a little bit stressful, but by the time I got to the end, I was like, every minute of that tension, every minute of that like feeling that this book is out to get me was completely worth it, because it's such a good book. And it was actually kind of a fun feeling. Like, I'm with my foray into horror, I'm feeling more into that space of like, it's fun to feel scared. It was a fun way to feel scared. And no other horror book has done what Just Like Home did for me this year. I'm hoping I find more horror books that approach that kind of like, I don't necessarily want every horror book I read to be like the narrative is hunting me for sport, but if another book manages to pull that off, I won't be mad. Completely different vein. And this one felt a little bit, I debated putting it on my list, but I decided I needed to. It's The Golden Enclaves, which is the final book of the Scholomance trilogy by Naomi Novik. Here's the thing. It's the final book of a trilogy. I wouldn't normally put that on my best books of the year list, but this last book managed to do something no other last book has ever done. Usually I have found in all of my like reading series, and I'm a guy who picks up the first book of the series, and if I like it, I read the whole thing, unless at some point I am completely thrown off by a book. And like, up until I read Golden Enclave, so the first 2 I read like the years they came out, 2022 and 2021, and I like really wasn't enthused about this series. I was like, I don't really think I'm gonna recommend it to anyone. Like, it's okay. It's not bad, but there were some definite issues with the first book. And the second book like didn't fully redeem those for me. It didn't really sell me and then I read The Golden Enclaves. This book completely changed my opinion of the entire trilogy, and it's now a set of books that I have been like begging more people to read, especially right after I finished it, because I wanted more people to talk about this with, because this book genuinely like drove me up the walls in the best way possible. I cried multiple times while reading it. It like reached into my soul and touched something, like some really deeply held like feelings about community and family and what it means to come together. And oh, it was so good. I don't want to spoil any of it, but I will say that the vibes of this book very much were Naomi Novik really looked me in the eyes and said, despite everything, it is still and always will be about love. And I said, thank you for my life, Miss Novik. I've read not every other book that she's written, but I've read most of the His Majesty's Dragon series, and I've read Spinning Silver, and I've read Uprooted, and I liked all of those books, but this felt like an author that you're like, yeah, these books are good, dropping their masterpiece on you. Well, you weren't expecting it. It was completely unexpected. You had no idea this was coming, and they've just dropped it on you, and you're like, holy shit. Again, thank you for my life, Ms. Novik. Now we get into the real, like, these are the real bangers of the year. Hell Followed With Us by Andrew Joseph White. This was White's debut novel, first book he's ever written. And when I heard the pitch for this book, I put it on my TBR and I pre-ordered it. I was like, I need this book to show up on my e-reader the moment it becomes available to the world. I will not be waiting on a library hold list. No. I need this book immediately. Because the pitch is, of course, horrible fundies have done horrible things to the world, and our main character is becoming something that is both angelic and monstrous, and is also trans, and it's really fucked up, and it delivered on all of those things. I wasn't disappointed by a single thing in this book. This book reached into my guts and grabbed my vital organs and said, I fucking get it. Andrew Joseph White came into my house and sat down at my kitchen table. Like, I have never read a fiction book that more clearly and deeply understood American fundamental evangelicalism than this book. Like, I got to the end of this book and I was like, if I ever got the chance to sit down with Andrew Joseph White for coffee and just talk about our respective upbringings, I would grab it in a heartbeat. Like, please. Because, again, I have never read a book, even a nonfiction book, honestly, that more thoroughly grasped what American fundamentalist evangelicalism looks like when taken to its, not only its most extreme end, but like its logical end, the logical end of what these people are preaching and talking about. And it took me months to read because it was incredibly triggering. But it was incredibly triggering because it was incredibly accurate, and the fact that it was triggering did not make it a less enjoyable read. It just made it a more difficult read, and a read that I had to like kind of carefully ration to myself so I didn't read too much at once and, bring disaster upon myself. But if I had to describe this book in one sentence, I would say fucked up queer body horror and catharsis. The ending of this book is so cathartic and is everything that I have wanted from queer revenge stories. And I know a lot of people don't find revenge stories satisfying, and I totally get that. I don't know how you'll feel about this one if you read it, because I would say different from most revenge stories. And also, like, huge, enormous content warning for body horror and gore. But this book was the way that I found out that body horror and gore only upset me because of kind of like a really intense over sympathizing with what that person must be experiencing pain-wise. And it is made very clear throughout the narrative that all of the like body horror and gore things that are happening to our main character are not painful, not even in the slightest. Sometimes he doesn't even feel the things that are happening to him. And so that made it bearable. Some of it was still a lot, but that made it bearable and readable for me. So shout out to all of my ex-Christian queer and trans people. This one's for you, bestie. Now we're down to the final two. One of which is A Closed and Common Orbit by Becky Chambers. Again, not the first book of a series. And this is I've only read the first two books in the Wayfarer series by Becky Chambers. But A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet was really, really good. And I loved it and I adored it. It was so good. That book is the epitome of hope punk to me. However, A Closed and Common Orbit looked me in the eyes and is possibly like the epitome of recognition of the self through the other. It is the book that is like embodied that phrase most of all of any book I have ever read in my entire life. I have never interacted with any media that so thoroughly captured the kind of relationship to my body and to myself that I have as a like trans, autistic, traumatized person. This book like touched something really deep inside of me, and it was so much in the best way possible. Like Becky Chambers really dives deep into questions of personhood and selfhood and like how like the ways that how we present ourselves in public and to the people who love us really influences the ways that they see us as a person, not even in like conscious ways, but in completely subconscious ways. And man, this book hit me like a brick in the best way possible. Man. And finally, we have, this is, to be clear, this is like not my favorite book of the entire year, but this book is the book when I'm asked to name like one book that is my best book of the year, it is the one I name, and it is The Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez. And the reason that I'm like, this is it, this is my best book of the year, is not necessarily because of like my personal enjoyment of it. I think Hell Followed With Us and A Closed and Common Orbit knocked this one out of the park, but it's because it is a masterpiece of a book, and I don't say that lightly. This book, you will like it if you like messy, complicated narration, if you like books that play with time and space, if you like books that play with point of view. This book uses all 3 points of view, somehow. I'm still not entirely clear on how this book managed to use all 3 points of view, but it does, and it's incredibly impressive to me. It plays with folklore, it plays with generational stories, it plays with legacy, it plays with the like inheritance of narrative and the inheritance of place, like that kind of inherited connection to place that happens even after diaspora has occurred. It is like a magic spell in a book, is the best way that I could describe this book. I have not stopped thinking about it since I read it. I have been begging people to read it. It affected me so deeply, and like the prose itself, like even to the granular elements of the prose and the similes and the metaphors that are being used, were so deeply breathtaking. Like I don't know that I can even convey in words how much this book feels like a masterpiece. I hope that this is a book that people are reading in English classes for decades to come, because it truly deserves that in a way that most of the books I read in my English classes didn't. So yeah, I genuinely can't recommend this book enough. If you come away from this video with you only want to add one of these books to your TBR, add this one, because I think everyone in the world should read it if they're even remotely interested in it. And maybe you won't like it as much as I did, but hopefully you'll still find it a good book. So yeah, those are my worsts and bests of the year. And now I'm going to briefly touch on my reading goals for 2023, because I don't want to make another video just talking about my reading goals for 2023. I think that would be a very short and boring video. In general, so my numerical goal for this year is to read 175 books. because I think setting that goal from the beginning of the year, I can probably reach it. Now, I have no qualms. If I am falling behind, if I feel like that goal is too hard to reach, I will lower that number, because it's not about the number for me, but I enjoy pushing myself, and like genuinely, I would like to read 200 books in a year, 1 year. I enjoy the challenge, and I enjoy kind of the way that it helps me prioritize reading in my life. Reading is an activity that I really enjoy. It's an activity that kind of really feeds my brain and feeds my creative energy. And it's an activity that like really helps me to dissociate from my body when I need to, for like reasons of just like I am in unbearable pain and I need to not be super connected to my body right now, and I need to escape. And reading really helps with that in a way that like video games and you know, like YouTube videos and Netflix shows like don't really. And those are all good and do things that I need in my life, but I really want to like push myself to prioritize reading a lot this year. Just like that was my goal for 2022 as well. I really wanted to push myself to read more books, because I'd really kind of lost my, not necessarily my love for reading, but I had lost kind of my commitment to reading, I guess. And I knew that it was something that was going to bring a lot of good into my life if I kind of pushed it up the priority list again. And it did. I have no regrets. This was a great year, and it was a great year because I read a lot of books and I prioritized reading. It's something that does bring a lot of positive effects into my life. That's my number goal. I have some other goals. I now own a Kobo e-reader, and Kobo runs a lot of great deals on their marketplace. So I now, I believe, own, not counting the giant stack of Diane Duane ebooks that I own now because she sold her entire catalog for a price that was too good to pass up. I'm not counting those, because those I'm going to read when I get to them. And I'm not going to like kind of push myself to that. But I do own, I believe I counted 45 other books that I want to read, but for the most part have not even opened. And so one of my goals for the year is to read books that I already own. I also have some physical books. You can't see them, but some physical books on my shelf that I haven't read in years. I also was gifted a gift card for Barnes & Noble this year, and I ordered some physical books. I've really been wanting to like read physical books again. I think I'll probably read those pretty fast after getting them, but I want to make sure that I don't end the year not having touched any of the books I own. I can often get caught up in the like cycle of checking out books from the library, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but like I bought these books and I want to read them. So I want to, you know, prioritize actually reading them. So that's one of my challenges for myself this year. And then my other more specific challenge for this year is reading more sci-fi. It was kind of a vague goal last year, but looking at the number difference between fantasy and sci-fi, I really want to get that ratio closer, or just in general, I want to chase sci-fi as a genre the way I chased horror as a genre this year and thriller as a genre this year. I want to put a lot of it on my TBR, and I want to read a lot of it that I have on my TBR. So in the interest of doing that, I actually have a fun challenge, like specific challenge, a fun like vlog planned where I go through the top 10 books of the Goodreads Choice Award for the sci-fi series, and I read all of them, sort of. A couple of them I've already read. Note of the Ninth, I DNF'd. I'm so sorry to the Locked Tomb girlies. So I don't remember what the exact list for that is, but we'll cover it in the video. I think I have like 12 books that I ended up being like, I want to read all of these. So yeah, I'm planning to do a reading vlog of that. It'll probably take a long time to release because I'm not gonna read 10 sci-fi books back to back. I'm probably not gonna do that. I guess we can't know. But one of the reasons I wanted to sit down and film this video was definitely because like that's something that I've been thinking about doing. It's something that I'm excited about doing. So I want to kind of give myself permission to get started filming that vlog, but I also didn't want to have it as a completed video before I got my like thoughts about 2020 as an entire year kind of like down in a video. And my other goal for 2023 is just going to be, I'd like to go back to doing monthly wrap-ups, and I would like to have reading vlogs out occasionally. And I don't know if that will happen because this is something that I do for fun in my free time. And, you know, I have consistently said from the beginning of this channel that this is never something that I want to pressure myself into doing, because the moment I put a lot of pressure on myself, it stops becoming fun. And I don't need any more sources of stress in my life. I guess we'll see. I hope to see you at the end of January. I hope to see you with my sci-fi reading vlog. And I hope that this gets out before the end of January. I did film it on my phone, so I have to edit it on my phone, which actually may end up being easier than editing it on my computer, but it does mean that like I can't do all of the things I normally like to do, and it will take a while. So yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks for hanging out, even though I haven't posted in months. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you came away with some, ideas of books you want to read from my best books of the year. And I hope to see you again as 2023 goes on. Thanks for watching. If you're new and not subscribed, hit subscribe. If you are subscribed and you haven't watched all my videos, go watch some of my old videos. They're like, 6 months old, but I read some great books this year. Some books that I did not get to mention in this video because I read them months and months and months ago, and they didn't make it into my best books list. But I read some real bangers earlier in the year. Yeah, I will see you in the next video.